Welcome back to another true crime video. I am Tiara Dominguez, and on this channel I talk about true crime cases. More specifically, cases from my hometown, Utah. According to the Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification, there are more than 400 cold cases across the state, and we're going to talk about them. Hopefully together we can keep these stories alive and maybe along the way bring the victims and their loved ones justice. First of all, I would like to apologize to all 3 of my followers for not posting last week. When I was researching today's case, I thought that it was going to be pretty quick and easy to research, and I turned out to be very wrong and actually found quite a bit on this case. Today's case is a little different in the sense that it is technically solved. Even though a body hasn't been found, police believe they know what happened and have closed the case. So you might be asking yourself, why are we even talking about this then? Well, because a lot of people agree with police and think that this case is pretty open and shut, whereas others aren't so sure. I can definitely see both sides, and I think that it's at least worth a discussion, and I'm really interested to hear where you all stand by the end of this video. Today we are talking about the case of 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley, but before we begin, I need to make it clear that I mean absolutely no harm or disrespect to anybody involved in the case. This is simply information that I have gathered for educational purposes and to spread awareness. I always encourage you to do your own research as well. Garrett Alexander Bardsley was born July 24th, 1992 to Kevin and Heidi Bardsley. And I believe he lived in Northern California before moving to Elk Ridge, Utah. He was the youngest of 3 siblings, 2 brothers and 1 sister. And it was said that he was really close with his older brother Cameron. They were described as being inseparable. And even though I couldn't find too much about Garrett himself, he seemed like your average 12-year-old boy. He liked sports, dirt bikes, and drawing. He was a Boy Scout, and he and his family were active members of the LDS Church. Garrett was described by family as being an innocent and charming young man who enjoyed the small things in life that many take for granted. Thursday, August 19th, 2004, Garrett left for a camping trip with his father Kevin and the rest of his Boy Scout group. It was said that there was about 18 scouts and 6 or 7 adults total. And this wasn't like an official scout camping trip. The young men's leader of the Salem 8th Ward, Gary Hansen, said that this was more of just a fun camp out before school started, where the boys didn't have to worry about merit badges or advancement requirements. The trip was only going to be for 2 nights, and the group was going to be headed home on Saturday. They were camping in the Uinta Mountains of Summit County, Utah, near Kubrant Lake, and this is where things get confusing. The word Kubrant is actually derived from the Ute language meaning long, and there's actually 6 other lakes in the Kubrant Lake Basin, which is what I think confuses a lot of people. The news articles don't say which lake, they just say Kubrant Lake, so a lot of people aren't sure which lake Garrett and his group were camped by. And some speculate that it was either Lake 1, which is the main lake, Lake 2, or Lake 4. Based on my research, I think that Garrett and his group were camped by Lake 2, and Lake 2 is where Garrett was last seen. The story that pretty much every news article tells is that Garrett and his dad got to the lake early that Friday morning and began fishing. Then Garrett slipped and got his feet wet, so he told his dad that he was gonna head back to camp and change his socks. And apparently when he started to head back, he began walking in the wrong direction, so Kevin hollered at him and pointed him in the right direction. And Kevin said that this was around 8 a.m. The spot where Garrett and Kevin were fishing is important to pay attention to. It was said to be about 150 yards from the campsite, which is about 450 feet, so not very far. A few other articles I've read said that Kevin thought he heard Garrett yell "Dad" at some point after he left. About 15 to 20 minutes went by before Kevin began to wonder where Garrett was. He should have been back by now. So he heads back to their campsite to look for him, but he can't find Garrett anywhere, and the other people in the group didn't see him come back to the site, so it seems as though he never made it there. And that is the story that you will hear over and over again when researching this case. But Kevin tells the story a little differently on the Nancy Grace show. And while I wasn't able to find the actual video of this interview, I was able to find transcripts of the episode. And on this episode, Kevin tells Nancy that while he was setting up Garrett's pole, he slipped and got his feet wet, and Kevin asked him if he wanted to go back and change, and Garrett said no, he wanted to stay and fish. So Kevin said that they laughed and fished for a while. Then Garrett said, hey, we're not catching anything. I'm gonna go back to camp, change my shoes, and get breakfast. And Kevin asked, well, do you want me to go with you? And Garrett said, no, I can do it. And Kevin said, quote, Garrett was 12 years old, you know, this is when they want to feel their independence. And so I didn't push him about going with him. And so I said, okay, end quote. Kevin watched Garrett go around the lake, and he said that as Garrett went around the lake, he passed the path going up, and so he called to him and said, Garrett, you missed the path, turn right up there and go straight up in. And that was the last time that he saw Garrett. He said that he did in fact head back to the camp around 15 to 20 minutes later and saw a group of boys sitting around the campfire, and initially thought that one of the boys was Garrett because it was cold and they all had their hoods on. So he went and got his breakfast, and when he went to the campfire, he realized that Garrett wasn't there. So he ran back to the lake yelling for Garrett, and after not hearing him or finding him, he went to tell the other church leaders that Garrett was missing. And the group immediately started searching for Garrett. And at this point, not more than an hour had gone by since Kevin last saw him, so it seems as though they have a pretty good start on things. But eventually minutes turned into hours and still no sign of Garrett. By 11 a.m., they called Summit County Police, and a huge search began that day by official and unofficial searchers, and they were searching by foot, air, and horseback. More than 200 volunteers and search and rescue team members searched into the night that Sunday for Garrett, and the search was scaled back to more than 50 professional search and rescue personnel working on foot and horseback the following week. The search for Garrett only lasted for 9 days, and by day 6, professionals said that they were on a recovery mission rather than a rescue mission. Temperatures dropped to the mid-30s the night that Garrett went missing, and even though he wasn't dressed for cold weather, the temperatures hadn't dropped low enough to be life-threatening, but they were expected to drop quickly. And Saturday, the day after Garrett went missing, there was heavy rainfall. A lot of people do question why the search didn't last longer. They were searching rough terrain, and the weather there can be quite dangerous and unpredictable, especially with fall approaching. But that's kind of why I think they should have kept looking for him as long as possible until weather permitted otherwise. So I would kind of agree that the search ended a little quickly. I mean, a professional search for him didn't even last a full 2 weeks. Family and friends did continue to search about 2 to 3 times a week for a couple of months until heavy snowfall mid-October halted the search. And by this time, a 3-mile radius from where Garrett was last seen had been searched. During one of the initial searches, a Nike sock was found in a boulder field about a half mile from where Garrett was last seen, and his mother Heidi confirmed that this was Garrett's sock, but a searcher came out and said that it was actually their sock. They said that they were changing socks during the search, and when they came home, they realized that one was missing. The day Garrett went missing, he was wearing a black Quicksilver sweatshirt, a t-shirt, black sweatpants that were reversible in red on the inside, white Converse shoes, and he also had his black and chrome ice fishing pole with him. The second and last organized search for Garrett took place August 4th through the 5th, 2005, nearly 1 year after his disappearance, and it was said that there was between 250 to 400 searchers, and on the last day there was 550 searchers. 3 groups were organized by Calvin Blome, one of the managers at Kubrant Lake, and they were assigned a search grid of 500 meters by 500 meters, and searchers spaced themselves about 3 to 5 meters apart and walked forward 500 meters, looking carefully in front and behind, and this was described as being a very slow and methodical process. Any evidence that was found was logged with a GPS coordinate, bagged and labeled. That way the search could expand from that point. Searchers did find bones, but they ended up being animal bones. Years went by with no sign of Garrett or any of his belongings, and experts concluded that he got lost, and as he was trying to find his way back, he was actually taking himself further from the campsite and deeper into the woods. And they believe that he was trying to find some type of shelter and hid or burrowed himself between some boulders or some type of crevice and eventually succumbed to the elements, and that's why his body hasn't been found yet. The family told police that 6 months before Garrett's disappearance, he took a wilderness survival class and learned that if he was lost, the best thing to do was build some sort of shelter and hunker down. His mom Heidi said that Garrett really took hold of the idea that when weather comes in, seek shelter. She also said that Garrett wasn't very adventurous and she believed that he panicked and ran in the wrong direction. Although it's unlikely, investigators also said that it's possible that he was attacked by a wild animal and drugged far enough to where he couldn't be found. This area is known to have bears and mountain lions. Sadly, this is where the story of Garrett's disappearance ends. It's obvious to see why some people think that this was some sort of tragic accident and Garrett got lost or hurt, but I can also see why some people think that there may be more to the story. Are you ready for my 2 cents? I sure hope so. Here are some of the thoughts that I have. The first one being the same as many others, and that's why Garrett went to go change his socks in the first place. He was fishing. Shouldn't he have expected to get his feet wet? That being said, even though this happened in late August, they were in the mountains at a high elevation early in the morning, so I'm sure that it was cold, hence why he was also wearing a sweatshirt and sweatpants. And I could see how wet socks could be uncomfortable for anyone, especially if it's a little cold and you risk getting sick by this. So I can understand why he went to go change his socks. What I can't understand is why he took his fishing pole with him when he left. He was supposedly changing his socks and coming right back. I know fishing poles aren't heavy, but why haul it back to the campsite with you when you're just going to be coming back? Maybe he was really proud of it. Maybe he was worried about getting a bite while he wasn't there to reel it in. I don't know. This part of the case just really got the wheels in my brain turning. But then I read the transcripts of Kevin telling the story, and according to him, Garrett didn't leave because his feet were wet. He left because they weren't catching any fish. He wanted to go get breakfast, and on top of that, his feet were wet. So I just don't understand why every news article stresses the fact that Garrett left to go change his socks, and they make it seem as though he was planning on coming right back after changing. Why not just say, boy goes missing on his way back to camp? I don't know, the media just really pushes this whole wet feet narrative, and Kevin made it sound as though Garrett wasn't too bothered by it in the first place. He still wanted to fish after it happened. The main theory is that he somehow became lost and hid somewhere in search of shelter and eventually succumbed to the elements, and that's why he hasn't been found yet. But Garrett was a Boy Scout and had passed wilderness training courses, so I guess take that for what it's worth. I'm not saying he was a pro or anything, but I would say that he was more experienced than most boys his age. And it was said that the area that they were camping at had been scouted prior to the trip and selected because of its easily identifiable features. And I get why people would think that Garrett would go and seek shelter, but he went missing at 8 o'clock in the morning. And people were searching for him less than an hour after that. And a full-blown search for him began at 11 a.m. It was nice weather that day and the sun was out. It didn't start raining until the next day, and I just don't see Garrett running to look for shelter in the middle of the day. I find it more likely that he'd be looking for help, especially if everyone that knew him believes that he panicked. I don't know, you would think a panicked kid would be yelling for help or listening for people. Also, as I've said, people were looking for him within the hour, and I'm assuming that he would be yelling for help as well as the searchers yelling his name, and it's just weird to think that they wouldn't hear each other calling out. A person actually posted in a forum about this case that they were near Garrett and his group's campsite when this happened, and they said that they could hear searchers calling Garrett's name, and they actually joined in on the search. And I've also heard that sound can travel particularly far in this basin as well. And say he did succumb to the elements, it's also strange to think that after all of these years, his body, clothes, or even fishing pole haven't been found. And if he were attacked by a wild animal, they wouldn't eat all of his clothing or his fishing pole. So where is all of it? Also, if the wild animal theory were true, there would have been blood or some type of sign of a struggle, and literally nothing has ever been found. Another theory is that he was abducted on his way back to the campsite. This one's also a little hard for me because they had to hike to where they were at, meaning they would have to hike back down. And I find it unlikely that someone would be able to successfully kidnap Garrett and literally hike off the mountain with him and nobody noticed that. But that doesn't mean that someone didn't do something to Garrett on the mountain that day. I'm not saying that this is what happened, but he could have ran into another member of the group on his way back and thought that he could trust them, and they ended up doing something to him. It is a known fact that when a child is abused or kidnapped, it's usually by somebody that they know. There's a YouTuber named Steve, and he does a lot of like outdoorsy videos where he hikes all kinds of spots in Utah. And he hikes the same trail that Garrett and his group hiked and fished at the same lake where Garrett and his father fished. And he does this to kind of give people an idea of the area, and I'll leave a link to his channel below. And he also finds it hard to believe that Garrett got lost on his way back to the campsite when it was such a short distance. And he also dives into the theory that Garrett ran into somebody with ill intentions on his way back to the campsite. The issue that I have with someone from Garrett's group specifically doing something to him is that this all happened so quickly. They began searching for Garrett less than an hour after he was last seen. You would think people in the group would notice if someone else was missing, but maybe things were so chaotic, who knows? Maybe it was a complete stranger who found the perfect opportunity to capitalize on this child's vulnerability. This theory could explain why Garrett wasn't able to hear searchers, or why they weren't able to hear him or find him after such a short period of time. Maybe he was already incapacitated. And this is crazy to think about, but what if, in the spirit of this theory, the person who did it actually helped with the search to make it seem as though they already searched a certain area, potentially the area he was in, and they went back and moved him or buried him later? I don't know. It does seem like a lot of work with so many searchers and dogs and whatnot, but it's just a thought that I had. I also think that it's important to talk about other people who went missing in the same area. An 11-year-old Boy Scout by the name of Brennan Hawkins went missing in June of 2005, less than 1 year after Garrett's disappearance. He was found 4 days later, about 5 miles from the area where he was last seen. Brennan had no food or water with him when he went missing, and he was dressed pretty similarly to Garrett. And something that I found super interesting about Brennan's story is that after he was found, he ended up saying that he saw searchers on horseback looking for him, but he actually hid from them because he didn't know if they were scary people. And he kept thinking of the 2 rules that his parents gave him, which were stay on the trail and don't talk to strangers, which in retrospect are really good rules to have, but it's unfortunate that they led him to run away from the people that were trying to help him. And when I read this, I thought of Garrett, and I wondered if he might have done the same thing. I mean, these boys were a lot alike in many ways. They were both scouts. They were only 1 year apart in age, so it's quite possible that Garrett reacted the same way Brennan did if he saw searchers. An Australian man by the name of Eric Robinson went missing in 2011 while hiking near the same area, and hikers stumbled upon his remains 5 years later. And although they can't be sure, circumstances led investigators to believe that Eric fell from the cliff bands below a place called Alsa Pass. 58-year-old Carol Weatherson and her daughter, 39-year-old Kim Beverly, also went missing in the Uinta Mountains while on a vacation in Park City, Utah in September of 2003. While nobody's entirely sure what happened, their camera that was eventually recovered depicts a pretty tragic story. It appears as though the weather started to change drastically, and on their way back to the trailhead, they became disoriented due to the lowering clouds and changing vistas. They were supposed to be headed toward a landmark called Mount Vista, but it's said from the point of the trail that they were on, a place called Long Ridge looks a lot like Mount Vista, and they went in the wrong direction, putting them dangerously off course. They lost the trail, and with the rain changing to snow, the woman sought refuge and built a crude shelter using pine boughs and a natural rock outcropping. Sadly, they eventually died from hypothermia. It's believed that if they would have been better dressed for the weather or even able to start a fire, they would have likely survived. Also, they didn't tell anyone about their hiking plans that day, so nobody knew they were in any trouble, and they weren't reported as missing until September 13th, when they had already been missing for 5 days. Their remains were eventually found 9 months later. I think it's important to talk about these other cases because it really puts into perspective how unforgiving the Uinta Mountains can be and how easily a person can get turned around. But I also think that it says something that each of these people were eventually found and Garrett never was. It's been 17 years and it's just puzzling that he nor any of his belongings have ever been found. Altitude sickness usually occurs at altitudes higher than 8,000 feet and is due to lack of oxygen because the higher up you go, the thinner the air gets. And symptoms of altitude sickness are nausea, vomiting, dizziness, exhaustion or weakness, and shortness of breath. And it's said that a person can experience altitude sickness anywhere from 1 to 5 days after ascending above 8,000 feet. And where they were camping was around 10,000 feet high, so it's very possible that altitude played a part in him becoming disoriented. But again, how far is a disoriented 12-year-old going to get? And I think this also goes for the theory of him getting injured. I just don't see him making it far enough and in such a well-hidden spot if he were disoriented or injured. I'd imagine that if that were the case, he would have been found rather quickly. Another theory is that his dad Kevin had something to do with it. I don't ever like putting blame on the victims' families, and I always get super uncomfortable even talking about it, but it is a theory that comes up, so let's address it. He was the last person to see Garrett, and the whole timeline of events is according to him. It is possible, but what would be the motive? The only thing that I could think of to fit this theory is that some sort of accident happened. And if that were the case, why not just go get help and explain that it was an accident? I don't know. Kevin has been very vocal and active in the search for his son. He and his wife have also set up the Garrett Bardsley Foundation, which helps organize searches for other missing individuals. And he also helped search for Brennan Hawkins. The year before Garrett went missing, he and his family spent Christmas in a small village in Mexico, and Garrett was looking forward to going to Ecuador the following year. So his family also helped build a school in Ecuador in Garrett's memory. Garrett would have attended Spanish Fork Middle School the year that he disappeared, and students at the school helped raise more than $22,000 and 1,000 backpacks for the school being built in his memory. I think it says a lot that Garrett didn't even go to the school yet, and people who didn't even know him made all of that possible. Garrett's story touched a lot of people, and it's easy to see why. It's also easy to see why people think that he got lost on that mountain, and why others believe something more sinister may have happened. Anybody in the area should keep their eyes open for Garrett's remains or any of his belongings. Again, when Garrett went missing, he was wearing a black Quicksilver sweatshirt, black Nike sweatpants that were reversible and red on the inside, a white t-shirt, Nike socks, and white Converse. He also had his black and chrome ice fishing pole with him. This case is just so bizarre, and I really don't know how to feel about it. Obviously, I felt strongly enough to talk about it, and I really want to know where you all stand on Garrett's disappearance. Thank you all so much for listening to Garrett's story. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And I hope to see you all next week with another case. Bye.